the great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination, and at the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, "How should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita?" Addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said to Venerable Shariputra, "O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita should see in this way, seeing the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form, emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics. There is no birth and no cessation. There is no impurity and no purity. There is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no I dhatu up to no mind dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, mind consciousness dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. They transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the three times, by means of Prajnaparamita, fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering should be known as truth, since there is no deception. Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way: Te ata om gate gate paragate parasangati bodhisoha. Thus Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, "Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice." When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Samarayami Deyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangati Bodhisoha Baba Gonju Zonji Gai Demi Doji Shea Rodoji Mika Doji Sheva Doji Jagi Baji Medumbi Judanji Jilingo Yezo Ngeri Ndonya Jeju Yewada Medonu Nyendan Jewadan Tumba Jimbun Zun Zun Jorjin Jaji Dejan Nenda Delejo. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. All sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas, high, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds of knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples as we are ready, a shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. Yedam Guru Radha Mandala Gam Niradayami. Yodan Zuji Chilnam La Jianju Badu Dani Yazuchi Dagi Jini Jibe Zunam Ji Jola Benji Zanye Rubario Jodan Zuji Chilnam La Jianju Badu Dani Yazuchi Dagi Jini Jibe Zunam Ji Jola Benji Zanye Rubario Jodan Zuji Chilnam La Jianju Badu Dani Yazuchi Dagi Jini Jibe Zunam Ji Jola Benji Zanye Rubario.
What the Lamrim to Lamrim? That Lamrim turned out to what the Legend, but that's Haji what the song about that. And Tendril had the maid, then out to the Bayina, and the Tendril Lamlujan would conscious like just to Gune, Magijubong to Jin Tang, Noti, Tangati, Chujus and the Riota, Noti, Chuju, and Nyaleche. And Jematuna de Balashana Jebaina, and the Hadamal Jeres. Then Tunil Mabishena the Latum, Tuji Lava, Nana Jebaina, Tabato to Gres, and the Shatu Santa, Tata Sheros on the Nana Jebaina, and the Saji Ungres, what the Saji Watus on the Marita. The Landrug what the Chungo did the church of Chibus on the Shivashas, Chibichungo Tomo Lajimba, Dinga, Dinatomo Lajimba, Chibichimi Lajimba, so to go to that what the lady over.
So, if we look at Tisha's lamp for the path to enlightenment, and we find, look for what the meaning of it is, we find three specific points. If one desires to have a rebirth in the higher realms of the gods and the humans, then there are pathways that are taught in the lamp that are the practices of going for refuge to the three jewels of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, engaging in the 10 or 16 definite goodnesses, and if one has engaged in a negativity, acknowledging that downfall or confessing that negativity. So one is able to have a higher realm rebirth through these practices. If one wishes to have liberation, then one engages in the practices which have the basis of ethics, and then have a union of calm abiding and special insight that has as its object of observation emptiness. So the three higher trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom, but specifically those two, the union of calm abiding, and the last two, the union of calm abiding and special insight, utilizing or having as its object of observation emptiness. And this is what leads to liberation. If one wishes to achieve complete Buddhahood, then it's necessary to unite method and wisdom and engage in this union of practices, and then one can achieve the state of Buddhahood. So this is explained and summarized in the beginning of Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, where it states that understand that there are persons of three capacities, small, middling, and great. I shall write clearly identifying their characteristics. So here, Lord Atisha is speaking specifically about those previously mentioned paths, those pathways for beings, those pathways shared in common with beings of small capacity, those pathways shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and those pathways for beings of great capacity, in that order as previously explained.
what they love to get Tasaji Takasura, that Jeremy Saji Rajas our Shin, then the Luchetaja River Nije, then the Luchetaja River Tala, Tayutala Nebulan, who never did a left. That Nebulan never did a left to the Kasuri, Chumuta Tumu, Dina Tumu Lazima, Jibishimi Lazima. That Chungu. 당아 중국하도 해야 말이야. 중국에 삼바장 뭐 삼바도 집에 들어도 주세요. 송제 다 삼바장 뭐들 지대 심마도 로지바다 지대 심마도 터된 봐. 니가는 지대 심마도 터된 봐. 저도 렌데니 말이야.
맞아.
다 저도들 가서 다 저도들 저도 소유 저도 소유 저도 소유 저도 소유 하자.
So, when we look at the Lamrim Tsong-kha-pa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment and how this is explained, we find a basic outline that begins with how to rely upon the teacher that is the root of the path, and then how students train their minds once having relied upon their teacher. And when we get to that second sections of how students train their minds after having relied upon the teacher, we find two categories: an exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, and then a second section of how to, or the actual way to take advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. That second point of the actual way to, or how to take advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, we find it begins with three major sections: training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of small capacity, training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and then training the mind in the stages of the path for beings of great capacity. So we're under that first section right now is what we're dealing with, training the mind in the stage of the path shared in common with beings of small capacity. And in that section we have three specific categories: the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity, the measure of that training of thought of a person of small capacity, and getting rid of or misconceptions, dispelling misconceptions related to a person of small capacity. So under that first category, the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity, we have two categories. First, developing a state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives, and then a second category of relying on a means for achieving happiness in one's next life, or the method for that achievement, the method for achieving happiness. So now we're in that section, the method for achieving happiness, or the means for achieving happiness in one's next life. And there we find the introductory topics of refuge and karma and its results. So we begin now with refuge, and refuge begins with an outline that has four specific categories. The first three we've gone through, and we're on the fourth point. The first category is the causes for going for refuge. The second category is based on that, the objects to which you go for refuge to. The third point is how to go for refuge. And then the fourth point is the advices for refuge, or the precepts about going for refuge. So we're now currently dealing with the precepts of refuge section in the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, or advices as we've been using. And that begins in English on page 191, but the actual body that we're dealing with begins on page 192. The outline is 191-2, and then we have the section we're going to begin with.
What does it just Lajatla, that Dualan you Lajatan, Mangan you Lajanir,
Less so?
Dualan you Lajatla, Giseni, Gisentambo, Giseniba. That Gisentambo, the Jebutambala Tempas, Tamamana, Sanji Conjula, Joseph Soyu, Jebutambala Tempas in Takata, Shinian Tensu, Shinian Tensu, Sanji Conjula, Joseph Soyu, and Shinian Tempus. Chenrezig in the Joseph Song-kha-pa, Dunu Tutu Mare, Tabatu Mare, Sanji Tu Mares, or Tetabu, Sanji Badan, Tabatu, Dunu Tobala, Dunu Lantan, Tabi Lantan, Sanji to be Lantan, Shinian Temples, Chibutambala Temples, what things are there. Niba Chula Joseph Song-kha-pa, Nije, and Chula Mibadan. Jesu tiba ilashivas, ni marva. Chula mibas yate, 주 퇴바던 퇴비된 일하시바
Less so.
퇴바서 다간데 출라 저도 소환산지 된들을 랑다 타빌랑다 주용 오지 말아다 되네 주 퇴고 버셨다 오레스 간주도 된주도 로정제네 퇴바야 버지나 퇴바야 버지 퇴비 되는데 되네 녀목이 녀부 힐라시 오레스 녀부 말다 너차 녀부 모두 받아 공주이 녀부 샤바고야 तमुग ने बंदे गुआला सुबा वो तनके ने बुइला से ओरस वो तनी तेरे मदो ये जे तागने कंट्रोल च सो छु ड्रोबे चला च सो छु द जेसु तेबी छु ड्रोबा से तो द मारवा वो ते जे तमजे ते मरे छु द तेबी तने
So.
न ड्रोबा गदियो गजु येते बाबा राजे बाबा शासन बाबा तो तो क्यों बची नाले जे ओरेस वो तो सों दे जमरवा
Okay.
ने जो संबा दा वो कोजो गुलो जे बना जे मुने दे वायो मार दल राब न्याले जे ओरेस तो सों दे जर
So when we go to the section on once you've gone for refuge, the stages of the precepts. So now we're under the major heading of once you've gone for refuge, the stages of the precepts, or the stages of advice on refuge. And under that, there are two ways that Lama Tsong-kha-pa will explain it. First, the way of explaining it related to the compendium of determinations, and then the second way of explaining it related to the oral tradition, or the oral tradition. So when we begin with how it's explained in the compendium of determinations, there are two subsets. So we begin with the first set of the two, and it begins with relying on excellent persons. So if you are going for refuge, these are advices that one should heed. And this is advice related to the Buddha refuge. So if one is going for refuge, then first he or she should rely upon excellent persons. Because if you wish to here this reliance upon excellent persons is referring to as its object the spiritual teacher, so relying upon a spiritual teacher. So it's stating that the advice is, if you go for refuge, the object of reliance here is the teacher. So one should go for refuge to the teacher and rely upon the teacher, and specifically a teacher that is an excellent person. It's not possible to engage in the pathways which lead to the higher realms, to liberation or Buddhahood, without this crucial stage or step of relying upon the teacher, because there has to be these things explained in order for us to proceed through these various stages. So our object of our dependence or reliance is the teacher. And here specifically stating that he or she be an excellent person. So this is related to the Buddha refuge. The second set of advice is related to the Dharma refuge, and there are 2 points that are made in the Dharma refuge advices in this particular section. First, listen to the sublime teachings, and then fix your attention properly on them. So here, listening to the sublime teachings is listening to the teachings of those pathways that are explained to achieve rebirth in the higher realms. Those pathways that are explained that allow one to have no more birth or have liberation, and those pathways that are explained that allow one to achieve complete Buddhahood. So here, this is listening to those teachings. The sublime teachings are those specific teachings on how one achieves those specific results. And then fixing one's attention properly on them is fixing one's attention on specific antidotes to the affliction. So the object of observation of one's attention then, or fixed meditation or fixation, becomes any kind of antidote to the affliction. So there were various antidotes that were given by Lord Buddha to serve as opponents to specific negativities. So if one has a negativity has related to attachment, then meditation upon ugliness becomes the specific antidote. If one has greater negativity with hatred, then meditation upon love becomes the antidote. And if one has a greater or is influenced more greatly by the negativity of delusion, then meditation upon dependent origination becomes the antidote or the opponent to that negativity. So here, one's attention is fixing on specific antidotes to afflictions. So this is the second point that's made among the 2 points related to the Dharma jewel's advice, listening to the sublime teaching and then fixing one's attention properly on them. And then the last point is related to the Sangha jewel, those aspiring to virtue. And the advice here is to cultivate a practice that conforms with the teaching. So the Sangha jewel, or those aspiring to virtue, are specifically those hearers superiors, those solitary realizers superiors, and those bodhisattva superiors. And the Buddha superiors. So here, one adopts a practice that is similar to those superiors. So here, where it says one practices with in accordance with the teachings on nirvana. So one is taking on the spiritual community as companions in the quest, or spiritual friends, and then cultivating a practice that is like theirs. It's a facsimile of what they're doing because they're superiors. So this is the advice related to the Sangha jewel, or those aspiring to virtue jewel. Decent.
다 지생이 받도 어디 있어 지생이 받는데 어버 먹어 받나서 어버 먹어 받다 가는데 이 말은 가서 신내기 준 신화도 거반이는 거반이 zaman
맞아.
당가서 보셨는데 때에 있는 보자를 나는 처음부터 안는 가서 내 버버 지시가지 저주들 때네 상루당고로 상루 찌찌당네 제라서는 마다마지 안는 어때 서서진 상당고르스 안에 거바 and sandu jeda kuba ina hote tenda yabungen mares ten aji tenge zu kuba ina toni kuba ina da pa kuba ina da kutsiji ne no gungu da tel mane baje ne me ba jeda choba ina goba la umar oto goba ka ures odi sare mago ombo mago badans
Lasso.
tambuje ta ta ngata shi shwa do goba ni no goba dres
Lasso.
다 라비지 안다 발랑와스 다드는 건조선라 저선 run에 안에 소소 네바 가제 주여바 이나 안 어디 라비지 랑랑이네 아브레스 먹이 좀 우스진 송도 바이나 먹이 좀 우스진 랑 그녀 밤이 도 송도 바이나 안에 그녀 밤이 도 다가데 소다도 바 송도 나바여바 이나 소다도 발랑샤선 도 바다 하도 바 소소 네바여 소게 라비지 랑고르스 니바 마르바
Lasso.
니바제
Lasso.
tene soba de kare niba je
Senchen Ninji.
tene saje ge daba niji zawa je res niji zawa je yin za ane chula jiao song yu senje la neba je ju ma res ane cawa dang senje sue ba la so o de je ju ma res ne se bon go res
Lasso.
o de son ba je ba da ga de choba bi ya ma re ka du je du choba bi ba ina
Lasso.
ane o de bhen shi bo res
Lasso.
jabu ashuka ge de jiwala ge jute bugu chuju ge ne sanji de shema phi jula gawala de ne jabu ashuka jiwala maro o de be ja nga zo de shuma mar ba
Lasso.
ane sanji lo de sa thwa to su choba be ba ina o de no ba nga zo so na chobu yong ge ro ta sanji go to ya ta ba to ya ane de to ya o de ne be chi wo yi
Lasso. So now we're in the second set of subdivisions. So we begin first with do not excite your sensory faculties. So here, this is dealing with one of the two obstacles to single-pointed concentration. So there's excitement and dullness. So here, excitement is referring to the mind moving to other objects than the one it is trying to fix on. So here, when we look at the development of single-pointed concentration, or if we're trying to meditate upon the meaning of the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, or we're trying to do deity meditation upon the deity, or we're trying to do meditation upon emptiness, the object at this point is to fix one's attention on only those topics at that point in time, not to move on to other topics. So if one is fixed on deity or emptiness or the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, then that should be the only object that one is concentrating on or fixing one's attention to. When some sort of distraction happens and one's mind moves to other topics, then this is excitement. So this is one of the two, again, obstacles to single-pointed concentration. So this is what's being mentioned here. So this is not dullness, this is excitement. And this is where the mind is moving away from the topic that one is trying to fix one's attention on to other topics than that. This is the first point, to not excite one's sensory faculties. So this is the excitement being an obstacle. And this is the first among the second set of subdivisions. So the next point that's being made is about taking up the precepts correctly. So it's here it says you should take up the training set forth by the Buddha. And here it says precepts and then trainings. And here this is specifically talking about ethical behavior. If one is able to engage in the ethics which abandons the 10 non-virtuous activities, then this is engaging in those precepts or trainings. And so it's referring to any among the advices on ethical behavior that the Buddha has set forth, and practicing them. So whatever one can practice. So whether it's in the householder section of the individual liberation vows, for instance, the householder vow for a male or a female, or any of the other individual liberation vows, or any of the bodhisattva vows, or any of the tantric vows. So here, the trainings here are specifically speaking of ethical trainings, and here whatever one can undertake, or whatever ethical behavior one can engage in. So this is the second point that's made. The third point that's made is being compassionate towards living beings. So the Buddha's truth, or the Buddha's truth has at its root compassion. So compassion is the root of the Buddha's truth, and because of that, because it's distinguished by it, or because it is the root of it, the advice is not to harm any living beings or any sentient beings. So this is the next point that's made, point 3. And then the final point, which is point 4 that's made, is to make periodic offerings to the 3 jewels. And one can make offerings all the time, because with one's food and one's drink. And it shows in many of the stories of the previous masters of how important making offerings is. And we find in the previous life story of King Ashoka, where he was a small child that with good motivation made an offering of sand to the Buddha, and as a result of this virtuous action was born as King Ashoka, and then did many great things for the Dharma and so forth. So we can see how much great merit we create by making these offerings, so that then we will be able to, like the small child was able to achieve the goal of the king, we will be able to achieve the goals of rebirth in the higher realms, achieve the goal of liberation, achieve the goal of complete Buddhahood. So these are the advices in the Compendium of Determinations.
상지 건조라 저서 송유 12지nem을 할라 저서 먼저 마제 남비 지nem을 할라 저서 노단 지금 말했어 남비 지nem을 할라
Ale.
베지터멘도
Ale.
그런 알아지도
Lessa.
나도 하는 제달라 저서 송마이 노스 상지 건조 가빌라서도 말বে
，lesso.
근데 출라 저서 좋아 담비 출라 저 좋아测心 随便想的这是，当别去了就是些，学工作了就是这边老家的啦，那现在那把解决嘛，现在说句嘛是，测心随便想的这是，现在的草本户的，现在说不本户的是，那是本户的是嘛的吧？根据来样，讲着啊，没得简单，如果没说的，就没得把它中的解决嘛的是。我的娘的很多的人多，娘的很多啊，说的感觉弄原因的。
Then Garpilaj on Drupa,
这隔壁老家说，隔壁老我了，
Drupa de Dullinger.
隔壁老家我的了，他叫什么啥的，娘来看结果的是，学过来的。
So we begin with now the oral tradition.
这可是一些安个点。
So we're on page 193 now. Page 193, and now we're going over how these advices appear in the oral tradition. If everybody wants to.
每个人女娃了你，叔叔当，什么个老家伙，当不了你，隔壁老家当，隔壁老家伙，当不呢，娘个人对吧？来生多少多，都娘个人对吧？娘的更多来，刚一送了江州啊，他那样的跟人的，那东他那现在了，教送嘛，因为长期工作了，教授送回，几天不他了，教授都能这个马的送的，我的娘的更多的点个多。
Okay. So here we begin then with the 2 points. It says in the oral tradition, the precepts are divided into special precepts and then general precepts. So the special precepts are called the white advices. So the white advices, here on the prescriptive precepts, we find a quote from a sutra called the Great Final Nirvana Sutra. And it states that those who go to the 3 jewels for refuge come closer to the truly virtuous. They never go to other deities for refuge. Those who go to the sublime teachings for refuge harbor no harmful murderous thoughts. Those who go to the community for refuge do not associate with non-Buddhist philosophers. So here there are 3 advices that are related each to one of the jewels. So the advice related to the Buddha jewel here begins with this first stanza that says to never go to other deities for refuge. And then we find in the Lamrim Tsong-kha-pa's explanation in here that it explains not going for refuge to worldly deities. And Rinpoche said that we could interpret this point that's made here about going for refuge. It's not proper to go for refuge to worldly deities, even if one even if one does not have a full refuge. And we could also interpret it as that it's not appropriate to go to non-Buddhist or Buddhist worldly deities for refuge, even if one does not have refuge. So it's not appropriate. There are Buddhist worldly deities and non-Buddhist worldly deities, and it's not appropriate to go for refuge to any worldly deity, be they Buddhist or non-Buddhist deities. So there are categories that are Buddhist worldly deities and non-Buddhist worldly deities. So this is the advice related to that, not going for refuge to worldly deities. The next point is related to the Dharma, that once one goes for refuge to the sublime teaching, which is referring to the Dharma, then one should not harm any living beings, any sentient beings. So here this is specifically speaking of not hurting or doing harm. Here it says murderous thoughts towards any sentient beings. And then the last point is related to the spirit, those aspiring to virtue jewel or the Sangha jewel. And this is not to associate with non-Buddhist philosophers. And here this is speaking of closely becoming close with those who are harmful friends, or are negative friends, or negative related to the refuge, or negative friends related to your refuge. So here it's speaking of not associating with negative, or here it says non-Buddhist philosophers, or negative friends, harmful friends. So when we divide the worldly gods, we can divide them into three different categories. Those worldly gods that are Buddhist worldly gods, those worldly gods that are non-Buddhist worldly gods, and then those worldly gods that are common to Buddhist and non-Buddhists. Then long kabane, jiten la this the. So we're going to now look at Lama Tsong-kha-pa's explanation. So we begin with the advice related to worldly deities. So worldly deities that are Buddhist and non-Buddhist, as explained before. Not going to other deities for refuge is explained as follows. Since you should not even go hold worldly deities such as Rudra and Vishnu as your ultimate refuge, what need is be said about Nagas and the local divinities who are hungry ghosts? While it is improper to entrust yourself to these beings without full belief in the three refuges, it is proper to merely seek the beings' help. I'm overreading, but I'm just going to finish. Beings' help for temporary religious purpose. So here we find this is speaking of worldly gods and the inappropriateness of going for refuge. And we find the quote that's from the beginning of Lama Tsong-kha-pa's Essence of Eloquence, that states that Shiva, Indra, Brahma, Kama, and Vishnu, all filled with self-infatuation, roar their lordship over the worlds. But at the sight of his body, here parentheses the Buddha's body, these sparkling deities bow at these sparkling deities dim like fireflies in the sun and bow down to the lotus feet. I, like these gods, bow down to your lotus feet. So we find this in the beginning, and it states then, how can those who are how can those deities help us if they are bound to cyclic existence themselves? How can they unbind us from cyclic existence if they themselves are bound? So here, the point here, Shiva, for instance, is the first deity that's mentioned at the beginning of Lama Tsong-kha-pa's Essence of Eloquence. And Shiva is a worldly god. And if a being is bound to cyclic existence, then they are not appropriate for us to go for refuge to them. So here, this is the point that's being made, and then it says, what need is there to be said about local deities and hungry ghosts and nagas if these great worldly gods are not appropriate objects of our refuge?
안 저런 걸 로비지스는 되게です. 저순도 줘요 말이지. 네, 그래서 그래. 더나 이제달라 더는 갈 사동하던 게 로비지스 수주주 정도 왔어. 다달 나소나 안 매트로지스는 안에 매기 저주 저 가서 보면 매기 안 매트로지스는 네 매발도시. 맞아 어때 로저 쪽으로 다 저순도 줘 된다 그래서
Okay. Now, although it is not appropriate for us to go for refuge to these beings, these worldly deities, it's all right for us to make offerings and ask for them to help us with something. So, as it's even though it's inappropriate to go for refuge, we can ask for assistance, we can offer our food, we can make offerings of various things and so forth and ask for help. And we should look at it in the same way as if, for instance, we need a benefactor. It's okay for us to ask if we need for food or for drink, ask for help. Or if we go to a doctor and we ask for some aid, and then the doctor gives us medication and so forth, and we put some sort of, I don't, Rinpoche didn't say this, or in their hands, or we rely for help, but not for refuge. Rely for help, but not for refuge. Decent.
다 죄라 저서 시절 내서 봉사 내가 돈도 니반네스 마다 돈돌라 소바 마다 돈돌라 소바 디바다 칭와다 고라쇼바다 탐보바다 메테 진도 게월라 소비 삼바다 유 시절 내바다 차와 봉바 오사 어디 마다 다 가다 마다 돈도 줄래 ane dibadan nga jo sugi hins wada diraguya juba shuya na tantare ane dibadan chingwasana labadan udazo marba chingwadan gora shuba sikui jine tene manda shuya dan wadana jaya yoro gora shuba dan tene mati jine kibasa duchi ane sinjine duchi chibatana ki ina kul kama tuba ina 안 콜 도부당데 다 가다 가서 신진 도부당데 리주로 와서 공고를 손대사래
맞아
전날로 디바당 칭와당 고라쇼바당 나보바당 메시지도 기 코추놀 다니바레 들어와 다니바데 테제 ane koda trakabre madutene dibasna jubagan chilgan chigan jabandu suyuna diba marba diba tene 디바다 칭와서나 라바 안은 정한도는 맞을 라바던 가마도 다운은 정한제도 고라쇼바 시고에는 간주야나도 좀 말해 고라쇼바 한부바스다 가서 이야다 어디서 그건 하보는 그 타바간 가그로보다 어디서 시즌 내도로다 메시지도 키바다 도지치거든
맞아
근데 어디는 그 아마이나 lomba mota mesa to solene sinjen to doti chbuki gorote gibal macha anu wate shen pe kale khabjegta wato so ta gade sinjen noyagle gad maje sonde sar.
The second prescriptive precept entails refraining from doing harm or injury to living beings through thought or deed. This includes actions such as beating, binding, laying in wait, or imprisoning, nose piercing, and overburdening animals, and so forth. So here, this is the refuge that's related to the Dharma jewel, and it is stating to not harm any sentient beings. So then there are examples of ways that one can harm sentient beings. So beating or threatening with something. So threatening with some kind of a weapon or some sort, or beating. Binding, so binding, tying a sentient being up in some way, binding them. Imprisoning, we can also put laying in wait, waiting secretly, harm someone. Nose piercing, so piercing the nose of the animal to be able to lead it around. Overburdening animals, putting too much of a load on an animal, or putting too much weight so that it harms them or hurts them. And then it says overburdening humans, animals, and so forth. So this is speaking of weight, or putting too much weight on humans or animals.
다 신진 뇌학을 제주에 말해 신진 소주에 말해 신진 뇌비를 뭐 제주에 말해 송대사.
So here this is specifically speaking of not harming sentient beings in any way, not doing anything negative to a sentient being or harming him or them in any way.
다 근들라 저서 소유 다 가서 근들라 저로와 모티바던 좀 문루사도 든데레도와 냥을 냥데 도게 손바 안에 건조선라 저서 이 메시지 고바시바 나다 튜마메지바 오사 모티바던 좀데 메시사데 질메치부터 손와르 모티바서야 내가 좀 사지다 최다 와서 고반데케다 medika mabu yero oto kusu kubande bana kubande jo mares kusu nabi chu dujare saje dujare chugunju dujare gni kunju dujare sa naje ananga chu tese jo mares 이 메시지 ane koa sheba nata tumba mejiba us kusu ki cheba ngaba jayoro tetan ndaba jejo mares ane ko toba jene digro ku cheba ngaba tetan tumba majene digres chetan toba jegre ane ngazu che sheba na jega maro shema tan toba jegre shema ki sheba na jega maro wotenu sonde
Okay, the third prescriptive precept entails not agreeing with those who do not believe in the three jewels as a refuge and who repudiate them. So here there are many different beings who do not agree with the three jewels and the presentation. So this is when we look at these categories. There are many beings who disagree with this. So these are beings who, for instance, say that the Buddha jewel is no good, the Dharma jewel is no good, etc. So these are, when we speak of these beings or negative friends, or negative friends, we're talking about people who do not. Who go against the three jewels of refuge, and then this precept is related specifically to our relationship with that person. So we shouldn't then, in a similar way, agree with them or agree with the way that they present their lack of reverence or their negative concepts about the three jewels of refuge. So we shouldn't agree with them. But we can be their friend as long as it's not going to influence us or it's going to harm our refuge. And then Rinpoche gave the example, if we befriend a cat, we don't all of a sudden take on the cat's views. Or if we befriend a dog, we don't suddenly start thinking like a dog. So it's similar to that. It's similar to this, no? So here, when it's speaking of not associating with non-Buddhist philosophers, it's speaking specifically with not agreeing with those or agreeing with those who do not believe in the three jewels or hold them in a negative way. So not having our minds, literally not having our minds sway by their beliefs. Or turned by their bbeliefs. So there are many things in common between Buddhist and non-Buddhist traditions. So we find in the Buddhist tradition the three higher trainings, we find in the non-Buddhist tradition three higher trainings. So we find common trainings or common practices with Buddhist and non-Buddhist traditions. So that we find practices in common. So for instance, the Christian and Buddhist tradition have many similarities. They have many common practices. So there's no issue with Christians and Buddhists being friends. And then there are many uncommon practices also when we relate, Buddhism and Christianity. So there's no problem there because we find common and uncommon points that are made.
다드네 추군줄라 저수유 안에 츠신 네비 센터와스 츠신 시진 타와지요 말 너바 안에 소주요 말레스 시진 너서 본고레스 근닐라 정로와 마디바던 루메제사데 마디바투 쪼방냐바 나지 대던 튜바제주요 말레스 질민데셰트 자구도와 어떠수 된다 아번게 고도
So when we look at the first precepts that are given related to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, we find first the explanation of not going for refuge to the other deities, worldly deities for the Buddha. The second point that's made as far as not going for not harming sentient beings if one has gone for refuge to the Dharma, and then not associating with not associating with non-Buddhist philosophers if one has gone for refuge to the Sangha. And here then it's clarified by J. Rinpoche is not having one's mind swayed by their concepts or not agreeing with those concepts. So these are the points that are made. So if we recognize and understand these points, then that are made and their meaning, then we'll have a full understanding.
logo de da lola so to sul ka ba to re cho sun do mares ina ya ka shu bla ana susul ga ba je to bi je la de ni ma ina ana ko sul ya san da se jin da de je ne ngal to bi je ru je sen di gres ana je da ngal sa ta ru bi je ru sen di do was ana membal mentor ru sen di do cho so man de di do tin da ba so mara.
So the point that's so related to the Sangha jewel, we find this not agreeing with those who repudiate the three jewels of refuge. And then the advices related to the Dharma jewel specifically were the advices that one should not go to refuge to worldly deities or nagas, hungry ghosts, and so forth. So here are local deities. But it's okay if we like specific worldly deities to ask for their help, but not to go for refuge to them. And we can look at it like the case of going to a doctor and asking for help so that we can have medicine given to us. So we could look at the relationship in a similar way of asking for help from these specific beings that we like or have some sort of affinity for.
Chula Chenrezig and Tshin Subi Center was at the Madan Tonula Suba, Dibatan Chinwatan, Gura Shubatan, Tambo Batan, meditation to Kiwala Subi Samba Dan Yu, Sinjela Nabatan Sawapumba was, Sinjela Nursabungures. Chula Chula Tambi Chula Chenrezig, Tshin Subi Center Test. So the
So that was, if I misspoke, that was related. The deities was related to the Buddha jewel. The Dharma jewel is forsaking harming any sentient beings. So refraining from doing injury to any kind of sentient beings through harm or thought. So this is related to the Dharma jewel. So the Buddha jewel, not going for refuge to worldly deities, the Dharma jewel, not harming sentient beings, and then the Asanga jewel, not having one's mind swayed by non-Buddhist philosophers.
Ganila Chandrowa, Matibatan Rumis,
Bless you.
And then Somba Terendo, Somba Ne, Kunchu Sonla Jasu. Imitations that Shiriba in a Shiriba Conjus Sola Imageba and then Nambal Kobande in Euro, Koso Tumba Jeju Maris, Chetan Trubujine, Chindaba Jeju Maris, the Otten of Marva, what is on there.
So, and then related to the Sangha jewel, we gave the explanation of not having one's mind swayed or beginning to act like those who do not believe in the three jewels. So here, this word, it says, not agreeing with those who do not believe. So those who don't have belief in them, and then here's another point, that who repudiate them. So here, it says to not have our minds swayed by these beings or not agree with them, but we can befriend them. And then the example was given of a dog or a cat. We don't begin to act like a dog if we can have a dog as our friend. So this is a point.
Nyande Gundo to Lolju and the Gabi Laja to and German Deshi to Lokuchu Nujimadu to Lolju and Jean Deshi to Telebate.
So then if we can look at these points that are made in the Great Final Nirvana Sutra, and we can hold these points that are inside of this, the three white advices, then we will be able to then open up the understanding of these three by looking at what Lama Tsong-kha-pa explains about them. So we'll take a short break, and we have some things people can eat, and then we'll be right back. Just very quickly, I would like to correct something. I previously was stating the white advices and the negative advices. And the word gapi, the word garpa, it sounds very similar. It's advice on what not to do. Kappa, to stop. What to stop, and drupa, what to do. So I heard and there's white karmas and dark karmas, so I just mistranslated it 2 times in a row, and at the break I was looking at another text, and I caught it. So it's advice on what not to do, what to haba, what to stop, and then advice what to do. So just want to correct that for the tape and for everybody listening, because I looked for hours for this white advice and all these commentaries and couldn't find it. It was just me mistranslating it. So thank you for letting me fix that. Bless up. So, a very interesting topic came up at the break where we say that Buddha Shakyamuni is the god of gods, but Buddha Shakyamuni is a human. So there's a doubt that can arise. So how can he be the god of gods if Buddha Shakyamuni is a human? And we state he is certainly a human because he holds individual liberation vows. And it's a qualification of the individual liberation vow that you have to be a human. So here this idea or doubt comes up when we look at this, that Buddha Shakyamuni is the god of gods, but he is a human. Didn't
no balance Lunzambly, what the Linsong Jeba the Bemegan Sotak what Jegres Jendal Chigmarazon.
Maingu.
Linsong Jeba the Bemela Maim Chandra.
Okay.
Chaluvali, Lunzambly, no balance.
New. East.
Or the
South. New. West.
Linsong Jeba Bemeji Della G. Mani Chenji Sula means.
East, Shar, Lo, Nu. John North.
Jean Damien
North.
North.
North Yomare. Okay. West. So the individual liberation vows are only held by humans in any among the three realms of the, any among the three continents. So the eastern continent, the southern continent, and the western continent. The northern continent, we find no holders of the individual liberation vows. So Shar, Lo, Nu. All these continents, we find that humans who hold the individual liberation vows, and not any other beings who are holders of these individual liberation vows.
So that
deals with what not to do, the advice on what not to do. And now we move on to the advice on what to do. So first, in the major heading is prescriptive precept, which is advice on what not to do, and then the prescriptive precept, advice on what to do. So here we begin with in the section on advice what not to do. If we go for refuge to the Buddha jewel, we should stop, because that not to do in the word stop, we're the same word here. So kappa is to stop. So we should stop going for refuge to worldly deities. If we go for refuge to the Dharma, we should stop harming living beings. And if we go for refuge to the Sangha, we should stop associating with negative friends or non-Buddhist philosophers. Less so.
and children in somebody words, Duja, Tanga Pocha to what the Ultra and then the Jachuba, the Immigrata.
Nipa.
That's one about Ganilla Joseph on you. That Taba Nazama Sabukon Tabat Anna in Jervata, come in Chile.
Respect. So the prescriptive precepts, what to do, deal with advices related to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So the first advice that's related to the Buddha deals with representations of the Buddha and seeing them all as equal, whether they were made of silver or gold, or made of wood, copper, or iron. Or clay, one should recognize them as equal and not judge them on the quality of the material that was used, judge it on the being itself. So here, this is the first advice on what to do. It's to act with reverence towards images no matter what they are made of. So the next point that's made, the second point, is considering any written words of the Dharma to be the actual Dharma refuge itself. So we have the Kangjur, the pronouncements of Lord Buddha, and the Tanjur, the authentic Indian commentaries, and we see here how we have them all housed very beautifully on an altar with respect. So it's making offerings and treating the texts and the written teachings as they are the actual Dharma refuge itself. And then the final is related to the spiritual community. So it's relating to the monks and nuns, those who wear the red or the golden robes. and not anyone who wears the robes of a monk or a nun, be they red or golden. We should treat those beings treat those beings with deep respect and not revile them or act negatively towards them.
That Ruby Laja, what the ancient nation, Ruby Laja Swan
194 on the bottom.
Ruby Laja Swan Sanji on Sanji Kuzu Remateba Lenye Chenda Shila Che Madashin, Wo Jesa Majabatan, Taman Juba Suji, Magupatan. And then Nyeta Pone Tumbatar Kubi Shindu Shedu Zontes Shetin Les Chetar Deshe Kuzu Shinle Chang Jeba Chendayan Rom Kebichus Sheson Sosa Ta Sanji Kunda Wate Sanji La Chazo Son Yu Rubi Laja Tilawate Laja Son Tambo Sanji ko Ramatreba Yanchi, Tangasu painting, Marba painting. Shetan water, Sanji ko water, Trishabatana, Shetan to Saravata, Sanji ko Ramatreba. And Sanji ko Ramatreba, Lene Chenda Shilanga, Ramatreba Shetan, Pitapotan Yure, Kashin Dins Yure, and Eden Kadu Dujatan Yure, Tesule, Dujar is Loju Maris. Shenda Shilanga, Kim Madashins, I want the Dujare, the Yabumarin, the Yaburis, what in the Loju Maris, Jim Madashin, who Jessa Majabatans, and the Saja Tansa Tubasatu Shaju Maris, Ayat Tansa Lijane, Cubabiana, what in the Chiguris, and who Jessa Saja Mazan to Sul, and Mazan Salijaju Maris. Ujesa Majaba Tans Taman Juba Suchi, Maguba Tans, Tamasun, Tang Hamaina, as a pearl, Seguno Sango, Tanimina, Conchiputta, Conchitana, Muyaguina, money rent, and then good Jana, and the Ganumuya Ruges, and the Jemangan party to what said Ruge, Tamajas, what the legend Mares, Taman Juba Suji, Maguba Tans. Taman Juba Sudan Mobile.
That's Yanja Suranang, the go Nyona.
Taman Juba in the Taman Juba Desert, Tangate Playa Gubina, money want rent.
Loan.
And then Kungi Jerusalem, and Kungi Jamana, and Yagmaro. Yagmaro.
Exactly what it means.
Takunga Jima taking is good you and a good Jagrata.
Lesser.
And then didn't say Ruches.
Lesser.
Tamanjus.
Lesser. So then the Tambo, the Rimo Kona, Rimo Dango.
Sanji Kuzu Remiteba.
Guzu.
Remiteba, that was painting to the Marbe. Remiteba and Chilla, Remiteba.
Okay.
Takuzu, that Satan said, Muguzaba, Maimbi Remiteba. Remiteba on Lenye Jadashi Lance, that Remiteba Shetan, the Yabu Yungre, either Kadu Duja Yungre, Co Latin Zuberota. What the Yabure Duja is a Loju Mare, Ladiba Dujare, Latin the Abu Duzlanamatu, Sanji could the Abu Loju Mares. Jadashi Lan, Jim Madashins, Jedas, Jun Taba Jun. Who Jessa Majabata, Mazan Sal Majas, Yazan Salija, and Chubambuana, Telege Waters, and Tamanju Pelena and Tamanju.
Lesser.
Shesuji, Maguba Tans.
Lesser.
Heta Bune, Tambatar, Kubishin to Zonde, Zongures, Sanji Najin, Sanji Dandawa, and the Chepi Yulija. Goba de Susan Dusana, Momolu, Shibitile, Shetinle, Cheta Deshe, Gozu Shinle Chan, Jeba Chendayan Rom, Kebichus. That's why you go to Shinguzuba Inanda, Saguzuba Inanda, Kandejima Inaya, Kebasuke, 장살jan 초반 배우거든. 초반 배우거든. 너무로 송도스 셰송소스 어떤 대시잖아.
So the prescriptive precepts, it says there are 3 prescriptive precepts. The first is to treat images of the Buddha as objects of reference, and specifically it's paintings in here. Paintings, just looking at the Tibetan, paintings of the body of the Buddha. Here, but also images it can be translated as, but Rinpoche was specifically speaking of rimo as to draw or to paint. So word images or paintings. Treat images of the Buddha as objects of reverence as they were the teacher himself, not pointing out their faults regardless of their quality, and not disrespecting them or treating them with contempt by putting them in dishonorable places, pawning them, etc. So here when we look at an image, for instance, a Tsong-kha, it's not appropriate for us to make judgments on the image itself by saying, oh, there is a fault with this, or there's a problem with that, and so forth. So we shouldn't say that this is good, this is a good image, and this is a bad image, and so forth. We should look at all of the images with equal reverence and not point out any faults or negativities. And it says here, and not respecting them or treating them with contempt, being disrespectful by putting them in dishonorable places. So, for instance, placing the Dharma text anywhere that's not clean. And this is why we put them on an altar or put them somewhere. And it says pawning them. And I asked Rinpoche to just go further with that. And that literally means if you don't have any money and you need some money and you have no collateral, going to someone who has money and saying, I'll give you this image of the Buddha if you loan me some money, and then when I have it, I'll give it back to you. So one shouldn't use it as an article of commerce. One shouldn't use it in that way. So Rinpoche gave the example I just explained. So this is what it means by pawning them. In the dishonorable places, putting them somewhere unclean. So here, then we get into a quote from Nagarjuna's friendly letter, where the same the same language is used, an image of the Sugata that Lamrim Tsong-kha-pa has chosen to use, and it says, just as the learned worship an image of the Sugata, whatever it is made of, even wood, etc. So here, those who are wise, those who are scholars, recognize the equality of all the images of the Buddha, whether they be made of silver, gold, earth, or clay, or copper, or iron. So recognizing them all as equally great images because they are images of the Buddha. So not judging them relative to the materials that they are made or the quality of the artisanship, if you will.
다가다 꼴롱라래 버랑하마 있나 사유 상지 사유 군지면도 랑가도 바자자요 그래서 랑가도 바샤바 있나 안 잡아탕고 ring 잡아탕도 고 사고 갈래 마음 매바자는 봐 안은 매질래요네 안은 상지 고도 다마 매바차는 것도 좀 더발 한국 자자요 그래서 한국도 그 동으로 그러자
Okay.
한국도 상지 공으로 그러자 버렸어 되네 아직 매진다 질래요 그래서 또다 상지 공으로 한국은 더요 그랬다 안은 제마 어디 집도 안 봐도 어디 다 한국 상지 공은 한국도 잡아대 되게 팔레버디야 그랬어 제주 니샤 되고 그랬어 니샤 꼴롱상 버렸어 어떤 시야도 꼴롱라래
Then the loju tambo, the chu, the tambo kona.
다 사유에서 랑가드발 다 상지 사유 구주인지로 자자지로
Okay.
잡았다도 시로
Less so, okay.
지금 한국지도
So there's this previous story of a man who came upon a statue that had fallen onto the ground, and it began to rain on it. So it was muddy, and it was raining on a statue. And then this man thought, oh, this is terrible. There's an image that's on the ground being rained upon. So he took off his shoe, and he put his shoe over the top of it so that it wouldn't get rained upon. And then the next man came another person came and then saw this shoe was covering up a statue, and then removed it because he said, "This is terrible. You're, covering up the statue with a shoe." And then the Trua Suya. So then the Buddha was asked which one of these actions was better, what was better to do? And the Buddha said they were equally virtuous because both people had equally virtuous motivations. So because of this, both people who, one put the shoe over the statue, the other took the shoe off the statue, both had equally virtuous motivations, so they were equally virtuous. So here, this is speaking of respecting the image of the Buddha, no matter what it is, no matter how it is cast.
Shibuseji, Lubatan, Malubi, Ganunala, Lamping Gojin, Chuji, Chusan, Chumayimba, Tishis. Chibu Seja said, Danhamale, what the Tashuriba Inagam Tivajirota, Chibu Seja against Jumbares, and Nakonge, and Namason Jibu, Lubi Ganutan, Malubu Ganuro, Malubu Ganul, Netu Papa, Raja Papa, Shansen Papa, Sanji Papa Yoro. Lubi Ganu, and then what the Malubu Ganu Dajumba to Dajumba. Lubi Ganu Papa to the Marba. What the Sukalo Langu Gores, Kusu Karashigres, Chuyima the Maima Karashigres, Katamba in the Roda, Jebu Sejis, Katangate, Jebu Sejas against the rest, Jebu Seji, and then Lubatan Malubi Ganu Nala, and the Kusu Katambares, Kartabrasana, Lamping Gujens. Lubi Gunu, the Malu Gunu, Galo, Lagun Gujeres, Meduta in Jerotan, Maluba Gunu on the Sanje or Lambi Gujen Chuji, Chus on Chumayim Chishis, Lambi Gujen, Lubi Gunu, the Malu Gunu, Chud and Chumayim Karashigos, Loveres, Sheba La Soba, Neme Mandawa, Takante, Lambi Gujen La Subi Takante. Name Mado, Juji, but Juji, and Jim Motu in Jerovata. Name Mado, Juji, Shebes, Medu Mado, Juji Taba, Juji Taba in Sosa, Juji Taba, the Diviles, Magawaris, Magawa Teki, Jushi Balatene, and Gwenye Mandawa, Juji Yuebi, choosing Yai Jetesa. Gumanda, Juji, and then choosing Yal Jivaris, Marva. Nyai is with Chete. Tumba will soon Jitune, Shaji Bado, Tundu de Basumbatans, one good name de le, and choosing Chene, good Juji,
Lesser.
And soon. Coaji, Setu, Coaji, the Setu, Coaji, the Setu, Shajatova. What then the Daku Lubatan, Lubi can do the Maluba can do the Langu Gujeres, Pam Gujen, Time Gujen, Mamma, Juji Law. Tin Namila then a co Chusin just waters, Nairi, Chusin Jene, Go Juji Yokinch, Chusin Jene,
Lesso,
Chusin Jene, then Saji Shajatobi Bato, Chusin Jene, they wish Umbares,
still do.
Temba was on Jitune, Shaji Jabi Pato, Tundu Deva Somba Tansa. Tundu Deva Zat, the Logiciamde. Daja Temba and Jagal Shudile, and the Yabatsuki Yazin, what the Nyango Juji can Yan Zin, Zin, what the Nyango Juji can do. And what the Mumbo got the Mutagachi. Ana Sanji Tepene.
Less so.
Ana Sanji could do Shinjilane, Chute Jukaras, Laudul Dakugan, Hamala, Sanji Shinjilane, Kute shares over Himare. And then Robata Malugan, Lambing Gujan, the time which is Diba Mosabas. Take Jushibalatene, na what the Chusin Chiver is,
Less so.
what Lugia, what the
Less so. Okay, so now we find a story from the exegesis of the discipline. Apologize if I did that wrong. Relates how Manava Kapila, who slandered the community of learners and those with no more to learn in 18 different ways, saying, for example, "What do you know of the teaching or non-teaching? Elephant head was reborn as a monstrous fish with 18 heads, remaining an animal from the time of the teacher Chenrezig until the time of the king of the Shakyas." The Sanjay Nipa, the Sanjay Sumba. Okay, so then Shachatupa Sumba, Yimba.
Sanjay Nazi Sutu Sanjay Kuanjitan, Setu Yosung, Shachatuba, Yosung, Shachatuba, Yosung.
Okay.
Mamaze, Sanjay Beji Jezremde. Kuanji, Setuji, Yosungji, Shachatuba,
Jipa.
Imbari.
Okay, touche. So here, this story is relating to a previous non-Buddhist who was debating the community. And here it says the community of learners and those with no more to learn. So the community of learners is referring to the hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattva superiors. And the community of non-learners is referring to those, so community here referring to those aspiring to virtue, the Sangha. So the learners, those who are Aryas of the hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattva vehicle. And the no more learners are referring to the foe destroyers of the hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattva vehicle, or the Buddha foe destroyers. So this is what it's referring to. So this non-Buddhist made disparaging remarks in the midst of debating to these different types of beings. So he said, you can't, so what do you know of the Dharma and not Dharma? So you don't know what is Dharma and what isn't Dharma. And then began to call them different names of animals. So we called them elephant head, and then pig head, and then lion, tiger head. All these different names of animals, and 18 different specific names. And then during the time of Buddha, there was a fisherman who was fishing. And pulled in this monstrous fish with 18 different heads, with 18 different animal heads on it. And there was a whole gathering of people, and they couldn't figure out why this fish looked like this. So the Buddha arrived and blessed the fish's mind to be able to recall what had happened. And he said that I previously had engaged in this discussion and had called the learners and non-learners, all of these 18 different negative names. And since the time of the Buddha Kashapa, the third Buddha, to Buddha Shakyamuni, the fourth Buddha, I have remained in this state, and it's because of the karma that I created negatively by disparaging these members, and because of all of these names, different names that I called them. So this is referring to that specific story and how negatively impacted he was by this act, and how long he remained in that state as a fish with 18 different heads because of that negativity. So we can see as a human, when we engage in negativity, the trouble that can arise. So it's stated that this being who insulted them in 18 different ways by saying these negativities, elephant head, etc., was reborn as a monstrous fish with 18 different heads, remaining an animal from the time of teacher Kashapa until the time of the king of the Shakyas. So there were 18 different insults made that resulted in 18 different heads. So when we can see by the stories, or the scriptural story that Buddha Shakyamuni has set forth in this advice of how we can engage in negativity so readily by saying bad things to people. And it's so easy to say bad things to people. So we can gather this negativity quite easily, and we have to be careful. And this is the Buddha's advice on us to be careful in what can happen if we are not. So here first we have to respect any image of the Buddha, of the Sugata, whatever it's made of, whether it's here in the Nagarjuna's friendly letter, it says, just as the learned worship an object of the Sugata, whatever is made of even wood. So respecting any image of the Buddha. And then the next point that's made, and this is related to the different, the story of the 18 heads. It's talking about respecting the Gendun Gupa, the Juje. The Nip Tambo. Rinpoche, the Tambo Lapcha, the Sanjay, Gonchu Lapcha, Nipi Lapcha, Chu, Gonchu, Gendun Gonchu. Or the Tambo, the Lacha, the Sheching. The Nipa. Oh, Kanga, okay. So then the second, so the first advice is related to the image of the Buddha and respecting it. And if I misspoke, the second set of advice is related to slandering and saying harmful things to human beings, and the advice on what negativity can happen as a result of doing so. So I misspoke when I said it was related to the Sangha jewel.
Long transit les doa long de long nage long transit jon tambas long transit le nani chungo yoares temba koanji nyangan de bi jesus da temba ko sanji naji sodo taji koanji da sanji koanji nyangan de bi jesus an jabun zeden se ge ju jerobata jinda jabun zeden je chöden chembishi shedu juba nas 다 상지 고안이 양한 대비 제소는 잡은 제행이 최대 점수 주고 이제 최대 점수 제도 줘봐나 라면시기 뜻답이 최대 점수 제도 줘봐 짱네 짱바 나장 심바 저 마시소스 셰렌이 셰발라스 다 내가 지고 잡은 제den기 최대 셔부터는 진고할 때는 가도 죽었다. 근데 그다 계좌 두자 찬이 녀면 주버스. 들라데는 다고 해봐 상대에서 그 제법 말ပဲ. 조부 추종 두년바 끼년부시 다 그쇼고래 레카 제비 라차 최대비 조사도 대바지 이제로다 콜라차드 세뉴 세그 제비 주는 최대한 부분이제로 표현은 그 해바 자된 제송어스 해바 자된 세가 조부초종 도겐바 긴템부시비요어스 제부페비 나밍은 제부들레 나미선다 제부들 긴템부 용거요다
That's
다 최대한 제부들이 가르치고 그 카탄바 되게 조부 최종 차는 도겐바 차원 버려
Nene, Chorten Chem.
레니소 셰벌라 실레버 심바나 죄네사 다그 최대한 카탄바데 와데 군조바 진지로다 쿨랑에 되는 세뉴는 세기 제부시도 주네스 최대한 다베 세기 제부시는 최대한 표바 인지로와 최대한 다베 내신 르총라사 대남이들 때는 내신 르총라 도겐바
That's
르부 최종 최대한 시부터 진리 가르치고 뒤에부터 르부 최종 도겐바 차인 바래 긴jenbo 제부 피비 제부되게 어느 게jenbo 긴jen바 자된도 제바 손베자 구zul한데네 된다고시 마마바다 다 구zul도는데 도자는데 야버스 어디쯤 말이 손인사
So the next point comes from the Draka basis of discipline, so another text from the Vinaya. So this exegesis of the discipline is a Vinaya, in the Vinaya teachings, the Vinaya Sutra, and this also Sudraka basis of discipline is from the Vinaya. And it says, relates how after the teacher, after the nirvana of teacher Kraku Chanda, King Karamat ordered that a great stupa be built. So after the beings passed into nirvana, the king ordered that a great stupa is to be built. And then one of the people working, I'll read it through, workmen cursed it twice, exclaiming, "We'll never be able to complete a stupa this large." Later, when it was nicely finished, he regretted his curses and used his wages to have a golden bell fashioned and placed on the stupa. As a result, he was born as Supriya Vat, sweet voice, with an ugly complexion and a tiny body, but a beautiful voice. So here, this is the story of a workman who was working on this grand stupa and became frustrated and exclaimed 2 times in a negative way, "We'll never be able to complete this stupa. It's so huge." So he was making a negative reference to how big it was and how long it was taking, and he said it 2 times. And then later, when the stupa was complete, he had a great deal of respect and started to have reverence for it, and regretted having said these negative words about the construction of this stupa and how large it was, and took his wages and offered a golden bell that was placed in the center of the stupa. And then later, when he was reborn, we find the details of the completing details of his body related directly to this action that he engaged in around the stupa, which is an image of enlightenment. So he was born with a very short, it says with an ugly complexion and a tiny body, because of the 2 times, the complexion and the small body, because of 2 times saying these negative things. But because he offered this golden bell with the right motivation, and he had regret, he was born with a very beautiful voice that everybody admired. So this beautiful voice was a result of having offered this golden bell. The tiny body and the ugly complexion, a result of saying the negative things about this image of enlightenment.
편지기 leg 그 매인 소다 편지기 leg 뱅거다 매인나 편지기 leg 뱀 차거다
That's
다코 조부 동에 봤다 조부 촌촌데 조지 먹이 도버스 조지 먹이 도바 긴제바데 조지 도바
So when we look at this in terms of karma, there are 2 types of karma: throwing karma and completing karma. So in this being's case, he's born as a human being, so he has virtuous throwing karma. If one is born as a human being, he or she necessarily has virtuous throwing karma. But the completing karma in this case is mixed. When we look at the completing karma related to bad complexion and the completing karma related to short body, then this becomes non-virtuous completing karma. And then when we look at the sweet voice, this is related to a virtuous completing karma. So we see a mix of virtuous and non-virtuous completing karma, but the throwing karma is necessarily virtuous because he was a human being.
답은 맞아 편지 먹이래 해봐래 고 돈도 인소상 편지 먹이래 편 쳐는 그래. 다 조제 교도 받고 조본 땅도 시라 니지고 조제 교도
And we find a similar example in the case of a peacock. A peacock is an animal. So the peacock necessarily has non-virtuous throwing karma, but the peacock has very beautiful feathers and a beautiful appearance. So this is a result of virtuous completing karma. So the throwing karma non-virtuous because of being an animal, and the completing karma virtuous because of the beautiful presentation of the this is the difference between throwing karma and completing karma. Just a translator's note, the throwing karma propels you into the rebirth, the completing karma fills in the details around the rebirth that you've been thrown into. So when we look at the issue of the man building this great stupa, the worker, he scorned the stupa 2 times by saying that this will take too long and it's too huge. So this person's future life, he was born as a human being, so his throwing karma was necessarily virtuous, but then we have this mixed karma. Because of the 2 negative things that were stated, these are necessarily non-virtuous results that come to fruition in the form of a completing karma that is negative. So the bad complexion and the short body. And then the offering of the bell, which is a virtuous action, becomes the factor that is the virtue that gives rise to the completing result of, in this case, a beautiful voice. So this is, we find a mix of the 2 negativities brought on by the non-virtue that gave rise to them, and the one positive quality that arose from the virtue that was previously engaged in.
Kuzu la den rawo she mama ta jeje kuzu so ju zombo le droba chenbo droba la shawa tans kuzu ju zombo le se da ngui da de ne kuzu ba da an chebu de zo ba le ne shali jan wo de me do ta wo de jeju ma shawa ta tele dubi Kandusu Shamarungo Sajermichi, Raja Marba, what the Menduta, what the Jeju Mares, Romares. I don't know how much Habazania Nazi Yungres.
Jadan Jedu Jadru.
Ah, the Tagidro,
46. Okay, so then, as a result, he was reborn as sweet voice with an ugly complexion and a tiny body, but a beautiful voice. Thus, you should never quibble over the quality of images, despise other for using fine materials for images and the like, or for making them large, discourage their makers from finishing them and the like.
다 가든 해봐 저든 어떤 해면 해봐라 되는 그 해봐 저든 또 해봐 조부셔주든 제바레스 나서에 상지 고조다 제단다 어떤 그 조견솔로 어떤 카타 어떤 제주에 말해서래 대제나 해봐 저든 나 용으로 다스
So this advice is given, and we find the example of this being who said these two negative things. But we also have relationships with these images. We have images of the Buddha, such as tankas and statues and so forth, and we need to be very careful around them. And this advice is given to us by J. Rinpoche with an example of why and the negative consequences of not doing so.
다 가나부 기신 내주바 챔비 주란장지 구시지소 표외 근데 젠다 레나 롬방가 게웨 진비세 슈지시네
Lesso.
레바라 슈베 레나 롬방가와 당가지 다가다 세 되는 거데 장고지 바로다 어디 조절 표현 어디 간에도스 대야부도스 주도 조르면지 아니 장고 올자네 잠베 올 말레바요 마레스 God Jesus
Lesso. So then it is said that the great yogi Shanchup Rinchen, who was a Kadampa spiritual teacher, said once he gave a statue of Manjushri to the elder, and elder here is referring to Lord Atisha. So he gave Lord Atisha the statue for him to examine. He asked, "How good is this? If it's good, I will buy it for 4 gold coins." And then the 4 gold coins that Rongwa Gargewa gave me. And then the elder, Atisha, replied, "Venerable Manjushri's body has no defects. The sculpture is midland," and placed it on his head. It is said that he did the same with respect to all finished images. So he put, after he was asked this question, he took the image of Manjushri and placed it on his head and said, "There is no bad image of Manjushri, but the artisan who made this is of medium quality. But the image itself, there are no bad images, but the artist himself or herself is of medium quality." So in the future now, we should have relationships with tankas and other images such as statues and so forth in the same way that Lord Atisha did, and view them all equally in this way. These are all stories or historical counts or stories that we can find the meaning in. So if we can read this, is very good. Decent. So it's very good if we can memorize or have in our minds when we relate it, when we're speaking of advice on what not to do, this sutra, the Great Final Nirvana Sutra, that says that those who go to the 3 jewels for refuge come closer to the truly virtuous. They never go to other deities for refuge, the Buddha jewel refuge. Those who go to the sublime teaching for refuge harbor no harmful murderous thoughts, the Dharma jewel advice. And then those who go to the community for refuge do not associate with non-Buddhist philosophers, the Sangha jewel advice. And then if we can have in our minds this quote from the sutra, the Great Final Nirvana Sutra, then we can think about the meaning that Lama Tsong-kha-pa presents in the commentary. Yeah, just a So we have the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment now in English, and we can rely upon it because of its the great importance of its information contained within it. So we find the Kanjur Jalanje. So we find that all of the meanings found within the 18 volumes of work by Lama Tsong-kha-pa are inside of this text. So we find that they are all summarized and abbreviated into all these 18 volumes into this one text, the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment for our aid, for us. They're all summarized into it. And then all of the great scholars that we find not only in the sutra pronouncements but also the authentic Indian commentaries are all presented within here. So it's very similar to us studying these texts here, the pronouncements of Lord Buddha and the authentic Indian commentaries, because we're studying this. We're taking the essence or the pith of all of these texts here and put in the essence or the pith of all of these texts here has been inserted into this text. It's very good. So we will end here, and we will do the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayers, etc. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure land. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri, and likewise Samantabhadra as well. Whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors of the three temples. I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness, all-powerful Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Wandak, upholder of scriptural and realizational doctrines, the spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great philosophical texts with exceptional wisdom and perseverance. Tuji Rinpoche Gutsi Shapi Denronan.